Jane. All right. So the next person that we're going to be introducing is doing something. It's actually one of the use cases that Jane brought up in the previous presentation. And it's actually using blockchain to kind of impulse or move forwards financial inclusion. And so we're going to welcome Renee Rensberg, who is a co-founder, and he is working now at cLabs. He's had a long and exciting career where he's moved from places like McKinsey, Morgan Stanley, the World Bank, now into, blockchain, which is really a whole different ballpark. So it'll be exciting to hear a little bit more about him and his background and what he's working on now from his perspective. Hi, Renee. How are you? Welcome.
Hi. Great to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much. So if you would like to, introduce yourself a little bit, talk about your background and what led you to be where you are and to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Rene. I'm one of the co-founders of Celo. Celo is a new kind of platform for digital assets that takes a mobile-first approach. I think when you look at the potential for this technology, that even Jane had some really interesting points in the talk just now. So much is limited though today by this not necessarily being accessible on, say, a simple phone. And we're approaching a point where we have about 7 billion smartphone devices out in the world, and those have really become commodities. But the financial products and services that are essentially, or that kind of are necessary, or that we want to see out in the world, are not necessarily accessible on those. And so that's been a big part of Celo's journey in terms of thinking about how do we make digital assets, cryptocurrencies accessible on phones? How do we make it so that for really any user out there, the hurdles of actually adopting and using these technologies are low? I think one point that when we talk about the what will it take to really have a more inclusive financial system? I think a lot of the challenges really are less about kind of being very specific and giving access to someone who may not have it, but thinking about what breaks down the barriers of actually kind of making that access possible. And so if you take WhatsApp as an example, you and I would kind of message each other on WhatsApp, but it's also true that it's become really in many places where if you look at if there's one app that someone has on the phone, it might just be WhatsApp, right? And so kind of really has broken down the barriers of actually getting a system adopted, regardless where in a kind of global context. And I think the same kind of breaking down the kind of paradigm that we've seen was messaging services and information traveling much more freely, more openly, more quickly, kind of on internet infrastructure. I think that's something that's possible with digital assets, with cryptocurrencies.
Mm-hmm. It definitely seems like it has so many applications, and it's definitely like a young and growing almost field. It's strange to call it an industry because really it can touch so many industries, right? But I guess focusing specific on what you mentioned on the fact that there are barriers for access on things that I guess a lot of us would take for granted, and we consider, access to Monzo, Revolut, of course, just turn on your phone and then you have everything, right? How was that something that I guess starting out your career at more quote unquote traditional institutions, how is that something that comes to mind, and where exactly do you see a need for a company like Celo?
Yeah, and maybe just kind of giving a bit more background on Celo. And yeah, you're right. So I started off in, kind of more traditional finance. And, I think for the most part, a lot of things are working well in the global financial system. But I do feel when you kind of look under the hood, or when you kind of look at, even pre kind of Bitcoin, pre kind of blockchain, what some of the leading economists or philosophers have kind of put out in terms of, hey, where's this world going, and how may currencies look like in 100 years, you actually see that there's quite a bit of potential. And I think we're at this interesting point in time where we're very early still in in this industry, whatever you want to call it, to your point. But the rate at which innovation is moving forward has been just phenomenal. And so, we've moved in a very short amount of time from this being really a fringe phenomenon to now having some of the leading central banks in the world, looking at how could they deploy a central bank digital currency, for example, on this infrastructure, right? Or looking at use cases far beyond finance. And I think for Celo, we look at the existing kind of ecosystem out there, and taking some of the payments apps out there, or even looking at this from a global perspective. I do think if you break it down, there's kind of the infrastructure piece of like just handling payments and handling kind of transfer of value, whether that's between people or organizations, whether that's within a country or globally. And then there's kind of the aspect of actually providing support to a user or an organization. And those could be separated, right? So you could see that infrastructure really underpinning a lot of the existing services that we have today, and just making them better, more efficient, faster, cheaper, and then separately also kind of leading to new use cases, right? And actually seeing use cases that are not possible with the current financial system. And so I give you kind of one example, or one situation maybe where kind of more specifically this is coming up in light of COVID. And by the way, it's interesting because I was at first, when you guys first pinged me, this was a physical event in London. And so I've been planning to be there. And then, obviously, now we're doing it digitally. But a lot of thinking has kind of shifted in these past few months, people thinking about how to kind of move things into the digital realm, right? And so I think digital activity has been increasing, but even more pragmatically looking at, for example, how our government's looking to get cash, get money to people so they can go about their life, relief payments, whatever it is. We're realizing that, it's 2020 and we don't have a good system, even in a place like Germany or the US, to just give people money. And for us, one of the use cases that get us motivated to start Celo as sort of a platform was actually looking at cash transfer programs that, for the most part, international organizations or humanitarian organizations are running, all around the world. And the cost, really, the operational cost of giving people money, just in some cases up to 30% of the amount that's being given, just seemed outrageous given the technologies that we have at our disposal. And so I think, that's a good example of a new technology making sort of something that we're already doing just better, right? And making it more frictionless and cheaper, faster, and all that good stuff. But then also you can think about, okay, what happens now if, and with Celo, the way kind of Celo works is you have, sort of a protocol that is, optimized for mobile, but in other ways kind of similar to some of the other blockchains out there, with kind of a few key differences, including an identity protocol that maps identifiers such as phone numbers to wallets. And so I can send you a payment simply by knowing your phone number, and you can then claim and verify that you have control to that phone number and see that pop up in your wallet. Or if you already have a wallet, it's there within sort of the 5-second block time. And that creates kind of a really interesting infrastructure, right? Where suddenly you don't have to worry about kind of sending money maybe halfway across the world. What are the banking details, or how may that person actually access those funds? And the digital assets on the platform can be pegged to local fiat. So the first digital asset on the platform, for example, is a stable coin pegged to the dollar. And so regardless of where you are, you have sort of the ability to actually receive a digital asset that's meaningful to you in a local context. But having that infrastructure in place now really kind of actually leads to a lot of new use cases, right? So you could see someone offering, communal kind of microinsurance in a community based on payment patterns. You could see peer-to-peer lending happening in places where maybe the only access to kind of a loan right now would be a loan shark who charges 20-30% a week, a month, whatnot, right? And so it definitely, one thing that we're very, very excited about is actually seeing kind of some of these new use cases. We just had a demo day last week for what was called Celo Camp, which was run by an organization in our ecosystem, Upright, with over 250 teams that were kind of present, participating. And one of the teams from Brazil actually presented a universal basic income, a peer-to-peer universal basic income. And so imagine just being one of a few people paying into a pot, and then that pot being just paid out to a community at the rate of, say, $1 a day per person. And so you'll see use cases that we just haven't seen in the world yet, but there's a demand for those, and it's going to be interesting to see over the next few years how some of that with technology that's now available is gaining adoption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's quite a few things in there that I think were really that you mentioned, especially the part where you said, how expensive the transfer of money can still be. Jane brought up an interesting example of a person in Papua New Guinea who, you take the remittance of $200, you're left with probably around $160 if it goes to a post office. But then just to travel to the nearest bank to her costs about $60 because she's in a village that is totally unbanked. And so actually she ends up with half of the original amount, which is just outrageous in this day and age, right? It's definitely an interesting issue to consider, the fact that there are still so many barriers. But this is a really cool step forward. And you mentioned a couple things, but I'll start with one. How about you mentioned that it's so important to have stable coins because it's what you know. And then you also mentioned earlier that, central banks are going to be a big player in this. Do you think that it's really important that established players and established institutions kind of ease the way into adoption of these kind of technologies? Do you think that that's crucial? Is there any way around it, would you say?
It's a really good question. So and by the way, Celo is fully open source. It's a permissionless system, so anyone can participate and contribute to it. And the way it's set up, and cLabs is one of the organizations that's kind of contributing to the code and running pilots and working as part of the ecosystem. But there's a pretty active ecosystem forming. We have an Alliance for Prosperity, which includes big organizations like the Grameen Foundation or Mercy Corps, and then smaller organizations as well in market that are all integrating and building with or on the Celo platform. And so a lot of what Celo can be is really driven by the organizations that are actually kind of using the technology. Now the beauty is that coming kind of to your stablecoin question, that where we're starting is we have the native asset to the platform, which is just the Celo token that's trading on exchanges. Anyone can buy it, and that token is basically serving a bunch of purposes. It's kind of the utility asset to the platform. It's used for governance. So if there are proposals by the community, anyone with the Celo token can vote on those proposals and approve them or kind of maybe ask questions or kind of vote against them depending on what the proposal is. And so we're in the process right now where we're kind of as part of that community and governance process, we'll see the first token launch, which is Celo dollars. And in the future, you can see others. You could see other stable value tokens that are also packed to other fiat currencies, or you could actually see community currencies, right? You could see currencies that are, for example, have a very strict monetary policy in terms of, just really bringing prosperities to a certain community, or having interesting kind of features where maybe there's a tax on each payment that then kind of goes back to the community, right? You could think of all kinds of different interesting mechanisms that could be set up and tied to a particular community. It also leaves room for natural asset-backed currencies. So kind of imagine, and this is actually possible kind of across the broader platform, but having assets, backed currencies that we want to see more of in the world, and not basically just other currencies, but you could imagine tokenized forest in the reserve. And so the more currencies get adopted, the more valuable kind of currencies become, the more trees we'll see out there, right? So, at a kind of abstract level, these are really interesting concepts that are now possible with this technology. And so from a kind of to more specifically answer your question, so how would kind of, how would it kind of play with bigger corporations or central banks even? The short answer is we'll see, right? We're just starting to see some of these big organizations participate in, running pilots or running programs, or maybe contributing to some of these protocols. But longer term, my expectation is, or my hunch is, that we'll see many of the kind of major organizations out there be active participants in a bunch of different protocols that they may be using kind of to go about their business, right? And so you have this happening today where at Square, a payments company out of the US, there's a team that's contributing to Bitcoin. And, that's, again, open source. That's, there's no business deal, no biz dev kind of relationship between Bitcoin and Square happening. But it's because, Bitcoin is used in Cash App. And so there's value there. And, it makes sense, where the company has basically kind of said, look, it makes sense for us to contribute to this open source technology. And, like many of the internet protocols here, I think the hope is that with Celo and some of these other protocols, they will go far beyond some of the use cases that we see, sort of, kind of some of the early teams, and become adopted widely. And that the benefit of that decentralization is that you don't have sort of the traditional kind of vendor lock-in, or one company controlling the system, which from an innovation perspective basically makes sure that things move a lot faster, right, and can sort of adapt to whatever Celo is used for in the future, and ultimately survive kind of our generation and generations to come.
Yeah, and you also mentioned the importance, and I mean, you brought up how Square is getting value out of the fact that their Cash App also is partly making use of Bitcoin. And you guys have the Alliance for Prosperity right now, which is at over 70 members. Would you draw an analogy there? Do you think that similarly, the members who are all working towards this kind of goal, all the members in this ecosystem, they're doing it rather than out of some sort of biz dev relationship, like you said? Is it more of like a, they all see the value that could come out of this innovation, ultimately?
Totally, yeah, and to be clear, I think for us, or personally, I think, look, unless someone sees the direct benefit, how this can make kind of the organization that they're kind of leading better, then I think it's the right time to engage, right? So I think with a lot of with all of the Alliance members, using Celo infrastructure can have a direct benefit to their day-to-day operations, day-to-day work. And that, I think, is the key motivator for actually joining the Alliance, for helping shape governance, for integrating the Celo platform. And whether that's for making remittances better, or allowing people to do online work and earn in Celo currency, and then enabling kind of a rich ecosystem where people can use Celo currencies anywhere they go to pay for things at local stores or for top-ups at carriers. I think the idea is obviously that, with any community, with any sort of ecosystem, the more people are participating, the more valuable the more valuable for the end user, right? Because the more things you can do. But already at this early stage, even in some of these very distinct use cases, there's direct benefit of using Celo over existing technologies. Yeah,
it's definitely a unique feature, I guess, of the blockchain, I suppose, is the community feel, the sort of teamwork aspect of it. And, as someone who's also had experience in the bigger, more traditional institutions, would you say that it's actually the innovation, like, as you mentioned, right? It's in the nature of the technology itself. Do you think that that's the biggest barrier preventing traditional finance from, I guess, moving in a more positively impactful direction?
Yeah, I mean, look, the power of community is like nothing else. And we just, I give you one example, one concrete example. So until last week, Celo was the Celo native asset was called Celo Gold. And, the reason for that was that, very early on in sort of the founding of Celo, we or Celo Gold, as it was called, served the purpose and still does, but does so much more now. Basically, being an asset in the reserve that backs the stable coins outstanding. And so, the thinking was Celo Gold, like gold being physical gold in a reserve, kind of underpinning traditional currencies. That's kind of an interesting analogy, and hence the name. But over time, especially with Celo launching and kind of being proof of stake, and Celo being the staking asset, the governance asset, really being used for so many more things, that name did no longer feel appropriate. And so one of the community members, one of the actually validators running the network, proposed a name change, and first kind of suggested it in Discord and on Twitter, and got feedback, and kind of then worked on a proposal and a kind of a Medium post to laying out kind of the rationale, and then submitted it kind of through the platform for a vote. And the community voted. We had over 100 addresses participating in the vote, and it was successfully approved. And so it's something that, if you think about a traditional organization, is that something that would happen? Maybe, yeah. But then, you think about all the different teams that need to be involved and the politics of that decision, right? Versus here, really anyone in the community, you could go to, Bittrex or one of the other exchanges that's kind of list Celo Gold today. You could buy some Celo Gold, and you could submit a proposal. And the reason for actually asking people to have gold to submit a proposal is because, you want to avoid just having the system kind of fill up with like a bunch of spam proposals, right? So you want the person who's making the proposal also have, kind of a stake, that they feel like, hey, I'm putting some time here into this, and I'm credible with my proposal. But you can propose an improvement to Celo, and then have the community basically engage around that, and potentially improve it. And so that really like suddenly moves you from, however big your organization is, whether it's tens of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, to making this accessible and adaptable on a global basis, right? To potentially anyone who is in some shape or form using the platform. And that's, I think, really powerful, because I think that can bring, a lot more positive change much faster, right? And you have sort of the, you have a much bigger, kind of diversity of ideas and input than you would have in a traditional organization. And to me, that's, I think, something that I think some of the best organizations out there have tried to do in a traditional sort of centralized sense, by having innovation teams or having incubators, right, and trying to bring outside innovation into the company. But here, that's actually core to kind of how the platform is evolving. It's basically through on-chain governance being able to get better and better over time, and be kind of guided by sort of the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know, it feels a lot more wholesome than what I guess a lot of us envision when we think of finance or the blockchain, or these kind of, I guess, what a lot of people would perceive as highly technical. And a lot of, I suppose, people do feel that way, that it's a highly technical field. And do you ever have trouble explaining to people, I guess maybe someone like your parents or your grandparents, because I know I do all the time, like, do you ever struggle to explain to them what it is you do? What do you think are the barriers in terms of, just average understanding on the street? Or for a lot of people who might be watching this now or later on when it goes up, a lot of them might be students. They might be thinking, oh my gosh, this blockchain, I'm not a hacker. How can I understand what's happening here? Like, what would you say, or what resources would you recommend people go to, or how would you explain it in an easy way?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So first of all, I think what I personally enjoy about this field is that it's very interdisciplinary, right? So yes, you have a strong technical component, but you also have to think about, hey, how does this fit into the regulatory frameworks in each of these markets? You need kind of a product approach, right? To see, hey, what are actually the problems we're looking to solve, right? And then from there, work your way back to what is the right technology. You have, we have economists on the team, we have cryptographers on the team, we have people who've, spent their kind of careers thinking about compliance and kind of regulatory frameworks, right? I think there's such a much richer kind of diversity of thought than you would have in a traditional startup, in a traditional, even tech company. And so I think that generally, I think has been something that's been interesting. And so to anyone who's kind of new to this, there's a pretty steep learning curve, but one thing I will say is the community is actually very welcoming. So once you kind of meet some of the folks, you kind of see kind of a high desire to have discussions, and don't extrapolate from sort of crypto Twitter where maybe sometimes things get heated, but sort of the average person working in the space is definitely just highly collaborative and open, and just given the open nature of the space, I think it's more approachable than many other industries. And we're very early days, right? We're 10 years into this journey, and I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible with this technology. So for anyone looking to join or kind of like start their career, this is, I think, a great place to do it, because there's going to be so much learning here, really, versus any other industry. Now, I think you also, by bringing this up, I think you make a really good point, because education is the number one kind of critical thing. And, whether that's someone who uses a crypto wallet or someone who uses kind of a decentralized finance product, right? How much like context is required to actually benefit from this technology? And I think personally, my sense is that the more this can kind of be in the background, the better, right? I think we want to kind of offer solutions that are, no one is asking, hey, how does my phone actually work? Like what is actually like, why does it turn on when I press this button? How exactly does it work? Sure, we have a general understanding. And I think similarly with blockchain, I think we want to make sure people have a general understanding of the benefits and what it actually could mean to them. But I think more specifically then in the applications, we want to just make this much more frictionless to really let many more people participate. And that's something I think that's been hard, just given how early the technology was. But hence our focus on mobile, on starting with sort of some of the solutions, what are the use cases, and then working our way back to the technology. But you're absolutely right, on the technical level, some of the work is, I think it's some of the most exciting work that's happening full stop in computer science today, right? And so you really have many of the smartest people in the world kind of working on this, which I think makes it a really great kind of industry to join.
Yeah, I think we will definitely have to agree with you there as UCL FinTech, and hopefully people will, join both us and Celo, as they learn and grow and hopefully find fulfilling and gainful careers to follow up on. But for now, we're going to have to cut that there. But thank you so much, Renee. It's been really great to have you. Hopefully we'll hear more from you, and we'll hear more from Celo and cLabs, as time goes on and as blockchain can only inevitably get bigger and bigger, right? So hopefully we'll get you back and you won't forget us when you're, huge and successful.
Awesome. That I would just say, anyone interested, just join our Discord, and everything is open source, everything is open. And so, even if you're just looking to dabble in this, there's so many ways to kind of get started. It's very different from a traditional company where, you don't really kind of see behind maybe the walls of like what's happening inside the buildings. Here, where it's very different. So anyone is invited to kind of join and contribute or engage.
Great, thank you so much for being here, Renee.
Awesome. Bye.